you can see these two dots or dimples there. And then if you angle the camera, angle yourself down, you see a little bit of a faint resemblance or outline, but it's so faint that you question even what you're thinking.
It takes you a day or two to sort of see what you're looking at, and then it'll start to pop out. So I have two eyes here.
But again, those two dots are pretty telltale where they were pecked. My name is Sven Hawkinson. I'm the Executive Director of the Aleutian Museum, born and raised here on Kodiak Island. And we're at the southern end of Kodiak at Cape Alatak. We're working on a project that's been documenting and trying to record petroglyphs that have been made anywhere from 1,500 years to 250 years ago. 10 years ago, when we first came out here, the Aleutian Museum logo had all of this black. And then we did the rubbings. And when I was looking at it, I was like, oh my God. It's like, wait a minute, our logo is not designed right. And so immediately we put that hole in the hand. And from Yupik myths, the hole in the hand is the Sedna, the spirit goddess, where she comes and takes all the animal spirits, but she has a hole in her hand, allowing enough animal spirits to pass through so humans can survive. For me, my own personal interpretation is don't take more than what you need so you can have stuff for your future. And then you've got the thumb, and then the four fingers, and then the hole, that centerpiece there, going down with the elbow, neck. You get the mouth, nose, eyes. Part of our ancestors made these. It's something that, I don't know, I mean, it's like when you see them, you're like, wow, this is really cool, because it goes thousands of years that you have this artwork surviving. You know, you have a Rembrandt or Picasso, and this is our Picassos, this is our Rembrandts. You know, it's like you see these and you're like, they're an inspiration. This is the largest conglomeration of petroglyphs on Kodiak, and people had to come here to see them. So I love this one because you see the spiral going here? When I was doing the rubbing, everybody focuses on just that. Here's these eyes. You've got your eyes and your mouth. It's a different petroglyph. That's the only one of its kind. There's another spiral over here, but this one here is the only one that shows that spiral, and then he's got his eyes up there. It has nothing to do with these two up here. I'm working with Joe Lipka, and we've been mapping out and documenting the petroglyphs. And this is a project I've been working on personally for 10 years, trying to understand the petroglyphs, but also document as much as possible before they're lost.
I'm making it so that somebody else could come back here and figure out what we were looking at in the same locations, getting the slope on the page. And my work is different from Sven's. He's doing glyph by glyph. I'm trying to find points of reference. Then we'll come back and we'll actually do measurements on this slope.
This is, as you can see, exposed to the ocean. You've got barnacles, you've got kelp growing on them. And so it's something that, you know, through time and over the next 10 years, we'll keep documenting them. And I don't know how to explain him. We call him the Martian Man. He looks like something, kind of like a Martian with antennae coming out, but I think it's like a sea urchin. But this guy here is really fun because he's got 3 antennae and then coming down with stuff here. And then inside he's got, what, 2, 4, 6, 7 dots. It's all up to interpretation. So I wanted to just get a really good idea of what was on this rock face here and this one here. Or last year, I was here with Mitch Semyonov and Nadia Chakinsky, and we found 113 new petroglyphs that no one had ever documented before on another beach over on the other side. This year we found at least, what, 16 new ones that no one had ever seen before. And so it's pretty cool that every year we come out, the more I see, the more I'm able to learn and actually see more petroglyphs than I had originally thought. Here in Cape Aleutech, there's something special about this place. It's a very calming place to come to. And whether they were whaling, trying to share our stories, is one of those mysteries that we'll ponder forever, I think.
Kipsuren chingia yatachluki auch suchtachtot. They hunt whales with poison spears.
Check it out, ready?
Yeah, I'm gonna see this. Oh, no way. Preform for a whale lance.
Yeah, in a cognac house.
Oh, that's so cool.
This is actually really significant because this is going to be a whaling lance. It's a preform. You can see how they sawed and snapped it to make it.
Well, it's special because it's found in context. I mean, that's what is really important. Is we find a lot of those out of context, but in context, this ties a lot of the technology, the last 4,000 years of technology,
Yeah, 5
together.
actually.
Yeah, that's really cool.
But we never find them in archaeological sites because and it is because of the whaling cult. These things had a lot of power, and whalers were not allowed to live with normal people.
They were not bad and not good, but they were just kept over there because of the power that they had and knowledge. That's the first one.
It's one of the whales, and the other one we haven't got on the paper yet.
The human in between is just amazing.
It is.
All things related to whales was very secret and kept apart from society. I mean, this is a very, very, very powerful magic was associated with these things.
I wouldn't describe it as being magic. I would describe it more as having a role in society that was, I guess, an elite status.
They were considered elite, actually, but
Well, elite, but they didn't live very long. You know, because you're dealing with poison that if you cut yourself, you're dead within a minute.
monk's hood, the aconite poison, is a lipid-based poison. So if you just put it on here with water or some dye, it wouldn't stick. It needs fat. It adheres to fat. So you have to have some sort of fat as a sort of
Adhesive.
adhesive.
Yeah. And then use human fat to render it, rendered human fat to make it stick. And the cool thing with these here, I was sitting there talking to my mom. She was describing to me in Alutiiq and English about whaling lances. And she's like, oh yeah, my mom told me that when the Russians came, they tried to use the metal, but the poison wouldn't stick to it. And so they ended up switching, going back to using lances up until the American period.
They would dig up bodies, of powerful people, and boil them down and make mummy fat. And there was a lot to that. One of the whalers came up to Baronoff, for instance, and said, as a compliment, when you're dead, I'm going to dig you up and make poison with you as a compliment.
And the forehead or the head, the whale, you got the dorsal fin, you got the tail. There might be just stories of the whales that gave themselves to him. I mean, it would explain such a big site here, especially with all the whales. And we're sitting here having lunch watching whales jump 2 miles over. And the whale's tail, when it went into the fluke, it would break off. And that's what you wanted to have happen. You want to hit it right here because that paralyzes this part of the whale. And so it can't swim. It rolls over and drowns.
Holmberg says they wanted to hit here. The fluke was the primary spot. Secondary spot was the tail. I think it would die after 3 days if it was hit here, and it would die 5 days in the tail. They had all these rates.
So only one person went out in a boat to get a whale?
One, and then in Russian times, a lot of times two. You'd have an apprentice in the back, and the front guy would do it, and the apprentice would learn how to whale. And after you killed the whale, a lot of it was to get the whale to come to the right place in the shore. You would have to close the bay ritually with the whale fat so that the whale couldn't escape the bay. what they do is they take the mummy fat after you struck the whale and you'd put it across the bay so the whale couldn't escape. He couldn't cross that line of mummy fat. You drag it behind your kayak.
And there were certain rituals that were performed when whalers did take a whale. You know, like the women being secluded and being docile to help with the men while they're out. And then the men not eating for 3 days after they've struck a whale to ensure that the whale does come back.
And then it would float up dead after 3 days. I mean, if it didn't stay in the area, maybe the people in Kaguyak would get the whale. I guess the Russians even found Kodiak whales in Unalaska.
Was there a role of shaman in the whaling culture?
The hunter was the shaman.
I think that's the shaman, yeah. The person? Shaman?
Shaman, that's what I think.
You know, somebody who's trying to bring whales here, but also show them the respect.
But you can see why people wouldn't really want to hang out with these people who are really in the other world, so to speak. You know, when they dug up a body, they wouldn't dig it up, they'd twirl around it, and the body would rise up on its own. And then they'd take it back to the cave to make the poison with it.
In terms of whaling, that disappeared in the 30s, and nobody's actually brought that back. Because again, what Patrick was talking about in terms of the sacredness of the whaling cult, and who was allowed to hunt and who wasn't. And the old whalers didn't pass that knowledge on because of the fear of the abuse of the poison and all the other knowledge that used to be there.
For the Thule, whaling is like, whales were like 90% of their diet. That's all their caloric needs. Whereas in Kodiak, we have cod, salmon, sea lions. We have a very diverse set of resources. So whaling is not essential. If they didn't kill a whale, they wouldn't starve. Whereas in Barrow, they did. So they focused more of their energy on it. Whereas in Kodiak, it's more of a prestige item. A whaling was very, very important, all the whalebone and stuff. And also the oil was a prestige item.
When the Russians came, and this is something nobody ever talks about, is from 1784 to 1819, during Shelikov and then Baranov's time, we lost 90% of the people. What happened to them? You know that Shelikov and Baranov didn't want to kill off their workers. Well, they took all the men and made them go out hunt sea otters year-round, or as much as they could, while nobody was putting up fish and food. And so when you have a large population and there's no food, and as you guys have seen how quickly the weather changes out here, if you don't have food, you're going to starve. And so in the wintertime, I think that a lot of people starve. When we looked at the glyphs, on the right side facing the ocean, you've got anthropomorphic scenes, you've got whale scenes, you've got dancing people. And then on the inside towards Alatak Bay area, you've got all the happy faces and people, but mainly faces. You've got a couple of whales and a couple of killer whales, but that's it. So the majority of the animals on one side and the people are on the other side. And I think that when they took whales out here, based on the currents, it brought that whale back in, and especially back into the beaches over here where we were looking at the glyphs. My own personal take, and I think that Patrick and anybody else who would actually study these are mainly because of the whales that are coming by. And based on what we've learned so far, and we can actually verify that these are during the transitional phase where they really started hunting more whales. It might have been a way for ritually trying to bring the whales in and then give thanks to the whales for them providing for the community.
And I've always argued that there's continuity in whaling from 5,000 years ago to 200 years ago on Kodiak. They made their lances the same way, and here it is. The brettes are like wearing a baseball cap. They're information that you want to convey to other people.
You often see men wearing toulebrets here, but some of them are so big they would have had to possibly fit in the cheeks.
I'm Patrick Saltonstall. I'm the curator at the Alutiiq Museum.
My name is Marnie Leist. I'm the registrar at the Alutiiq Museum.
When we studied them on Kodiak, we found that 1,500 years ago, they were mostly used to tell what family you were. So you'd find each village that you look at when you look at the Lebrettes from a site, you'd have like 3 or 4 different styles, and that's because there were probably 3 or 4 different families in that village.
They're made out of a variety of materials, everything from the local slate to ivory, antler, kennel coal, wood.
You got the mouth right here. Lebrette's here.
And you find regional groupings of these styles around the island. The south half of the island has different Lebrette styles than the north half, and the north half shares with Kachemak Bay area, whereas this end shares with the Alaska Peninsula. And that's a kind of like macro regional, related families.
And then we have a very deep V brow ridge that may even come over as far as this. 2 eyes coming down to a mouth. And then below the mouth we have 2 Lebrettes, one here and one here.
I'm not too sure if it started out small. Maybe it was a coming of age thing. You started smaller and got bigger. I mean, I do know that just simply as we age, our skin loosens. You have to keep wearing bigger Lebrettes.
And then when you looked at an individual site, when I dug at Settlement Point, I found that each house had a different style of Lebrette, and that's because each family had its own house. So Lebrettes are very good at saying what family you are.
There's various elutic styles, everything from looks like a button to a Lebrette that has concentric circles.
And another thing that's cool about Lebrettes, once you get rank society, once it went from Kachemak to Kodiak, so 500 years ago, the Lebrettes get much bigger because they're also talking about status. So you still have the family styles, but then you get a couple that are really highly decorated with shark's teeth and paws, and they're much bigger.
Definitely a status symbol. Some of the big Lebrettes that I get to work with, I can imagine an Alutiiq elder, wearing this. I can imagine the stories that he would have told, and I try to imagine the food that he would have eaten. I mean, this is something, it's very personal. Something that would have been in someone's mouth.
So he's got a forehead, nose, there, eyes. He's got a mouth with his tongue sticking out with Lebrettes.
It's like, when you have Lebrettes, it means you're having the beginning of formation of what we call corporate groups. You're beginning to see people identifying with certain families and groupings, sort of totems or whatever.
Hear my Lebrettes, hear me roar. It's a status symbol, for sure.
The Aleutians, they have them back 4,000 years. On Kodiak, I don't think we found Lebrettes much beyond 2,500, though. We just haven't dug enough. I think if we dig enough 4,000-year-old sites, we'll find them here, too, because it seems like whatever happens in the Southeast and the Aleutians and Kodiak, it all happens at the same time.
Except I did hear one story how, the Russians didn't want Alutiiqs to wear Lebrettes, but the women always felt very shy about taking theirs out, and they didn't want to be seen with them out.
When you look at it in terms of socio-political development, it all seems to happen synchronically, because what you're doing, what your neighbors are doing. These are from the site that we surveyed today. When you find nettles, you usually find an archaeological site. That's like one of the plants that like sites.
They're better than broccoli.
We actually got a lot more than I thought we did. Most of the sites we're going to show you are village sites. You'll see the big houses with the side rooms and where people lived. In each house, probably, according to Lysianski, Karluk had 220 people, and I think there were 22 houses. It averaged out to 18 people per house. They'd be related through the mother. So there'd be like a group of sisters living in a house, each with their husband. So you'd have like 3 families in a house. So here we are, Sven.
So what have you found so far?
Well, I think this is the biggest site on the whole peninsula, and it extends from here all the way on top of this rock, which is on the Shelikof side, all the way over there, the Iulik Peninsula side.
Yeah.
So, and we kind of
Alatak Bay, yeah.
78 house pits.
Oh.
They look like they're all about 1200 AD. They're a lot like what we found at Olga Lakes. Transitional houses.
Oh, cool.
They all look like they have roof sods, maybe side rooms, pits. I'll show you one over here in a minute.
All right.
The hearths are all we're digging test pits for, because all we're doing test pits for is to date these villages, because we want to get the age of these villages, and then hopefully we'll be able to, by association, age the petroglyphs, Because if the only villages near the petroglyphs are 800 years old, that means the petroglyphs are probably 800 years old. Because the petroglyphs, being on rock, there's nothing to date.
Everybody calls you Barabras, and Lydia Black used to get mad at me for that.
Oh yeah, she got
She
very
says,
mad
that's a
at me.
storage pit. That's not, it's a house. Damashni.
I think
But-
Barabra is a Siberian word,
Yeah,
isn't it?
well, I don't know. But Russians call all storage pits Barabras. But our real word, Larry Maffei, who grew up over here, called them chikshoks. He's like, they're not Barabras, they're chikshoks. That's the real home, a house in Alutik. So.
It's kind of a mess. But yeah, this is what we did all day yesterday. We made this map of all the house pits. I think we found 78 house pits out in this area here. The next stage is to test them to get charcoal so we can date how old they are. We have your petroglyph clusters.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
petroglyph 8,
Yeah.
7, 9, 6.
Cool.
In late prehistoric houses, there'd be, you'd have a main room, it's sort of like a common room, and then you'd have side rooms where each family lived. And these are the oldest multi-roomed houses found on Kodiak. And they're not very big. Probably one family still lived in it, but for some reason or another, they're starting to add side rooms. Amy thinks for storage and it's economic reasons. It's a 3 meter by 3 meter square, might have had a tunnel, entrance tunnel, and you can see pits. Like here's a pretty good pit over here. And this is probably attached, but the sod that they capped it with is so thick that you can't see a depression anymore connecting it. So here's the little side room. And I cannot imagine a family living in this room because it's probably only a 2 by 2 or less, 2 meters by 2 meters.
You'd be surprised, Patrick. We'll have to debate about the side pits because, you know, families live together. And my grandmother had, 19 kids in a 2-bedroom house.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
a lot of the kids that actually, if they had big families, they would go and live with other families, the ones that didn't have kids.
I have the notebook from when we excavated one of these houses. Look how big that is. They're tiny. They're 1.5 meters.
Now this is a spot.
This is a house pit.
This was cool.
Look at these two, side by side. They're probably connected. We were thinking about mapping them as one, because they're probably connected, but we ended up...
They might have been connected right there.
And this one looks like it might have had a hearth. The hearth, that's the focus of the house, where you cook, light, everything. And it's actually interesting, if you go to really old Alutik houses, 7,000 years ago, they don't really have a hearth. And if you think the reason why, it's because there's no driftwood. The trees weren't built up yet. And there we find these boat-shaped lamps, and they have wicks all along the edges. And that's because they use the whale oil or the seal oil to both cook, heat, and light. In later prehistoric houses, like this house, they would have used the hearth because they had a lot of wood. So you'd do all your cooking and heating with this, and then the oil lamps have only one little wick spot because they're only using them for light.
We waste a lot of wood today. We don't think about how we burn wood because it seems so common. But in the past, when you don't have much, you make a little bit of wood go a long ways.
Even when they were using those little boat-shaped lamps with the long wicks, it was really warm on Kodiak. It was actually warmer than today, I think. Yeah, and then it got cold about 4. And that's actually out there, we found what we think are what we call early catchback. There are 4,000-year-old sites. And that's when I think times were pretty hard on Kodiak. It was cold, and they started to fish like crazy and smoke fish. Really focus on fish and salmon.
But didn't the population on Kodiak increase then too?
That's when it increased, yep.
During when salmon started showing up.
Well, yeah, because before that, people were just sort of moving from resource to resource.
But they did that anyways, even during the Kodiak period.
But they had a focus village too.
Yeah, winter village.
Yeah, and once you have a winter village and you're storing your food, it makes sense to have more people to catch the fish.
Yeah.
You know, so then all of a sudden, population goes through the roof.
Yeah.
I'm 5 feet 10 inches, and the rod right now is at just over showing 4 meters. It's like 5 meters 20. I like to keep the rod as low as we need it, just because I don't want the wind to catch it. Because 1, it's a bear to handle, and 2, will break the rod. What I'm doing is I'm standing, trying to give Patrick the center of the house.
My map is a jumbled mess, but once we shoot all these points with the transit in relation to the datums,
75?
I'll be able to draw the edge of the rock, because he'll go around, bump, 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 and then I get the angle and the distance, and we're good.
Then I'll get the top of the wall, and then the natural surface of the ground around the house. And then people would build a house and they'd stack sods. So we want to get the height of the wall or the height of the stacking episode. And then we want to compare that with the natural soil surface so we can get an idea of what sort of a depression it is and what sort of house it is, because we tell a lot about ages of house by the construction that we see visible when we're just on a walking survey.
This is a much more recent site. You can see that it's much more lush vegetation, a lot more pushki, nettles, and salmonberry. And this is actually the midden that's coming out of the house. There's a house right above here, and this is where they're throwing their trash. And here is the house where all that stuff came from. And this is a multi-roomed house. And now you can see it's much more clear. See how it's square with the high walls? Because they're stacking the sods on the side of the house, not the top. So there are no roof sods. And like here's a little side room. And you see how it's depression here? This was a tunnel, a cold trap tunnel. And this is a family room right here. Maybe 18 people would live in this house on average, according to Lysianski. So a whole family, this is their side room. And there might be another family in another one of these side rooms over here. Or a banya. We know there's probably a sweat bath room here too, because we found all that sweat bath rubble. But you can also see the hearth. See here, see how there's sort of a square depression in the middle? And I can even see the rock right here. And here's another little side room, right in here, smaller. And then there's another one right here, and crawling up in through the tunnel, right in here. Some of these had sod roofs. And as Sven said, you could probably put a family in here. And yeah, you'd fit your little family in here, and everybody would snuggle up tight. And you'd be really warm. And you know why you need to be warm here, because there's pretty bad storms. And then here's the last side room for this house, right here. So it's 1, 2, 3, big one. And then the fronts often don't have a big built-up wall. And then that might have been a side room, but I'm not sure. Bears dig in a lot of these houses and kind of mess it up a bit. But this is a pretty clear multi-roomed house. Nettles. And by the way, this is what we've been eating. These are the nettles. And these grow on the sites. You only find these in the more recent sites where you have really lush vegetation. And they're pretty good, actually. It feels so weird.